Chapters 50 and 51 show the aftermath of Miss Havisham's fire. Pip has been very severely burned. His right arm, a little bit, he singed his hair, but his left arm and left hand significantly, such that he has to wear it in a sling. He cannot put it in a coat anymore. And that permanent damage that has been done to Pip is really significant of the imagery in general. Fire destroys. And we saw what effects it had on Miss Havisham and how it finally irrevocably changed Satie's house, which had always been an 840, and Pip, every time he visited, said it never changed. And earlier in the novel, when Pip had burned his indentures to Joe, that was fire imagery, irrevocably severing his connection as an apprentice to Joe. So now we have the damage. The damage that Miss Havisham and Estella have caused him is palpable. And when he returns to London, Herbert is the one who's going to take care of him. He tends to his wounds very gently, and Herbert reveals what he learned in Pip's absence talking to Magwitch. So while Pip had made some connections with Wemmick about Molly, Herbert made some connections about Magwitch. Turns out Magwitch and Molly were lovers. They were the ones married over the broomstick, and together they produced Estella. So Estella's father is convict number one. Who knew in chapter 1, when Convict tipped Pip upside down, how literally he was going to transform his life, first by being his benefactor, and then by being the actual father of the only woman Pip's ever loved? Here's the thing. Magwitch doesn't know Estella is still alive. When Molly escaped and came to Jaggers and turned herself in, and the child had disappeared, Magwitch thought that she actually killed the child. That was the threat. So how incredible is it that Magwitch may get to find out that Estella is still alive? Also, it finally makes sense. Why would Magwitch spend his entire life and life savings just taking care of Pip? Well, Herbert points out on page 433, he says, "How old were you when you came upon him in the churchyard?" Pip says, "I was in my 7th year." He was 7 years old. And he says, well, it happened some 3 or 4 years ago then, and that you brought into his mind the little girl so tragically lost who would have been about your age." So when Magwitch first encountered Pip, the first thing he thought of was the child that he lost. So by funding Pip's future, in a lot of ways, it felt like to Magwitch he was getting a second chance at being a dad. Now that Pip has solved this mystery, he takes it to Jaggers. He goes straight to Little Britain and talks to Jaggers and Work Wemmick and puts it all on the table. This is one piece of the puzzle that Jaggers himself didn't know. He didn't know that Magwitch was Estella's father, and he thinks that Magwitch is making it up. But Pip hasn't told anybody. He went straight with the information from Herbert to Jaggers. And so on page 437, Pip gives the whole story about all the false hopes into which he had lapsed, the length of time they had lasted, this discovery that he has made, how he's loved Estella long and dearly. And then he turns to Wemmick and he says, "Wemmick, I know you to be a man with a gentle heart. I've seen your pleasant home and your old father and the innocent, cheerful ways with which you refresh your business life. Please tell Jaggers he ought to be more open with me." So he outs Wemmick right in front of Jaggers when Wemmick clearly specified he wanted to keep work and home separate. So poor Wemmick. And Jaggers, for the first time in the novel, breaks into a smile. He's never smiled. He's only shown his work side at all times. And he says, "Wemmick, you must be the greatest imposter of all of London." Tender human moment, and we get to see not everything is as it seems. That's the theme of the novel, that take nothing on looks, take everything on evidence. All this time we thought Jaggers might be a corrupt defense attorney who is all about the money and washes his hands of the criminals and is unaffected by them. Not true. He says on page 439, put the case that this lawyer, talking about himself in the third person, lived in an atmosphere of evil and he saw children being generated in great numbers for certain destruction. Put the case, Pip, that one pretty little child out of the heap could be saved. He chose Estella for Miss Havisham, hoping that she would have a better life. Whether that happened is, I guess, up for debate because Miss Havisham had her own agenda that obviously has damaged Estella, and now Estella's with Drummle. But regardless, Molly was a murderer, and Magwitch was a convicted felon, And so ideally, Estella did have a better life than she would have had. Jaggers ends his speech, though, for whose sake would you reveal the secret? For the fathers? For the daughters? For the mothers? Ultimately, Jaggers thinks nobody should know. What do you think? Do you think Magwitch is entitled to know that his daughter is still alive? Do you think Estella should know who her real parents are? That might humble her a little bit. It's hard to know what Pip is going to do.